Hey, 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 you guys haven't heard my voice in a minute or seen my face in a minute, but this is going to be one of those conversations with the loneliness coach that's going to be unique. And we are talking about relationships with my co host and co host of Sexy and Disabled, Dr. Michelle Fynan. First off, Michelle, what's got you excited today?
What's up? Well, talking about this with you definitely has me excited. When we were even just putting it in the calendar, I was like, yes, and block off everything else because that's how I feel about this topic. It's how I feel about just talking off the cuff with you and connecting with you about this. And I think it's so needed for everyone involved. We talk a lot about disability, so of course it's like supportive of people who have disabilities, but I think this topic in particular is important for non-disabled people to be a part of for sure.
Yeah, and let's start it right there. This is going to be my disclaimer for this conversation. So
Ruh-roh.
we are not going to necessarily have the answers during this conversation, and I feel like knowing what we're about to speak into, it does warrant a much bigger conversation than
Mhm.
just us two talking about this, because we're going to be talking about something that involves us and yet is a separate experience from what we can actually speak into because it's not part of our experience.
Right.
But I'm super excited. And what kind of sparked the question for me was you were a speaker in the Walk in Your Worth series, and it was interesting because you spoke a lot about your personal experience of dating and relationships, and there was a lot of talk about, well, now I'm reconsidering what it might be like to date a person with a disability. That was the host kind of perspective shift
Hmm.
during your conversation. And so that was interesting to listen to and kind of see that happen in real time, and
Hmm.
also see like many people as human beings trying to figure out, because it's a topic that's not discussed a lot. It's like playing a game of Minesweeper.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I just hit the three, so there's a bomb around here somewhere. Where
Yeah.
do I step? And like that, as humans, we do that a lot with a lot of topics, and disability just happens to be one of those major topics that people are like, okay, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to
Yeah.
get it wrong. I don't want to offend anybody. And so it kind of was interesting to watch somebody's perspective shift while also seeing like that societal narrative also being played out. Like, what do I say here? Uh,
Yeah.
what's appropriate, what's not, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Nathan, but just the way things are these days with just like cancel culture being such a very big thing, I myself have felt that minesweeper game, even talking about disability myself as someone with a disability. So when someone who does not have a disability comes to me and says, like I don't really know like what to say here. I want to just be open with you and say like I'm not super comfortable. I'm like, no, I get that because we're talking about a topic that it has the potential to feel like, oh, I could really like hurt someone's feelings. And I think the more we talk about things like this, that's what helps it feel like less of a bomb and
Yeah.
more connection based so that we could have like real authentic conversation, and it doesn't have to be a bomb exploding. It could be, hey, maybe we could change this way we're saying it, or educate someone on what we prefer, and so I think that that's where this could potentially go.
Yeah. Oh man, what I like about what you just said right then was actually saying, this is what I prefer.
Hmm.
Because even in our preferences, the language that somebody may prefer, guess what, people? It may not be the politically correct
Right.
language. Like,
Right.
I may not want you to sometimes say, I'm a dude with cerebral palsy. I like people first language. Some people don't use people first language and they have disabilities. Like,
Yeah.
I'm autistic, I'm deaf. And those aren't people first language um, usage of how we would do that, but that's their preferred way of communicating. So, and
Yeah.
we have that each person. So, actually being able to say, and we say this a lot when we're in conversation with each other, what say what you want. I think that's huge.
And not only that, but being open to the idea that preferences change as well. It's a continued conversation. It's not a black and white thing. And, I myself was very focused on like people first. That just felt better to me. Then, as I started doing more like diving into just like the way society is disabling people with disabilities, I'm like, and that's really that shift of when someone is owning that, like, no, I'm disabled, like, and they're really kind of like taking that power back. I'm like, I could kind of get behind that too, and because I think that oftentimes, I mean, disability isn't just the things that are we're dealing with physically. It could very much so be the barriers that are out there because of society. And so I think that's an important thing too. So again, it's like preferences change. This is gray. It's not like a black and white thing, and it's okay to talk about. We could have hard conversations.
Yeah, so sticking with the idea of preferences, what really caught my attention and the wheel that started turning in my mind as I was listening to you speak was um, the idea of, man, as a person with cerebral palsy, a disability, uh, when it comes to relationships, there is a strong narrative about what that looks like in the world. Uh,
Hmm.
and, we've talked about that many times in our conversations, but the fact that are we even supposed to be in relationships with other people? We're never the attractive character in TV shows or in commercials or anything like that. And so the question that I started thinking, I was like, okay, this is normal, right? This is a normal train of thought
Normal,
for,
what a word, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a normal train of thought because it's what we've been taught. But in the opposite of that, I was like, what if what if the reason why this has become such a pervasive thought is also the other end of someone who does not have a disability. They they meet one of us, and they're like, "Man, I think they're really attractive, but I now don't even know how I feel about myself
Mm,
thinking that thought.
yeah.
What does
Yeah.
that mean about me
Right.
that I just thought that?"
Right.
And
And
so, yeah, that's what I
yeah,
was thinking as I was listening to you guys discuss the topic the other day.
and I can appreciate the thoughts that could potentially come up because at one point in time before I was or at the level that I'm currently at as far as like accepting my disability, there was this level of like if I didn't want to date anyone who had a disability
Mhm.
because what would that say about me? Like that I could only get someone with a disability. But how warped is that thought because I am someone with a disability? So what does that mean I'm thinking about people with disabilities?
Well,
Not
yeah. What
worthy,
does it mean that
dating.
you're thinking
Yeah,
about yourself?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly, because I am in that group that I'm disowning. And I think that, we see that happening a lot. Well, as a therapist, as a coach, you see those messages that are oftentimes unconscious coming to light when we say things like that or when we talk about thinking those things.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I don't think that we necessarily are going to have any answers or solve the problem. But I think my goal for this was to just start this conversation, and hopefully, like, if you are somebody who's listened to us talk for any amount of time, and you have a disability, share this with your non-disabled community so that they can be a part of the conversation. And I wonder, other than having the conversation, like having this conversation, I wonder what are other things that will start to reshape the
Mhm.
narrative.
Well,
Um,
you kicked it off saying like how are people with disabilities even viewed in society in media, just not being the love interest in the show. It's more of like a token type of space that's filled. But I believe that's shifting. And maybe that's the like eternal optimist in me. But I feel like I'm seeing it or like feeling into that space of like that shift is on the horizon, I guess. I'm hopeful. But it takes people with disabilities too, I think, going out there and applying for those roles in the media or becoming influencers in that way and sharing their voice and being seen, which can be a scary thing. But that also takes non-disabled people sharing their concerns openly too, I believe, about like, hey, I'm thinking like maybe people with disabilities, maybe I'm suddenly open to this group, which that's what Danielle had shared in our talk. And I loved her being authentic and open about that and her experience in shifting that thought that she had.
yeah, one of the things that was like a hesitancy was the idea of this person is going to have a lot of needs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that again is coming from a place of a portrayal
Hmm.
of one way that disability can play out in the world, but it's like the strongest
Hmm.
portrayal that's out there. And I love, I believe what you had said was, yeah, so hey, they might have extra needs where and we're human, so we're gonna have needs, but you also said, but what if they're able to meet a need that you have that you can't see
Hmm.
because you're not giving it a chance to even be an option for you.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it I think it also presses on internalized ableism that people with disabilities may have because of being told this. And so there's a part of some of us that like believe that on some level, and
Yeah.
it's a big fear. I mean, it's literally like in the word, like disabled, like not able, like I'm not able, I have needs, you know?
Well,
So,
okay, hold on, stop right there, because it's also in that one of the most dominant words used in the community, and I know a lot of people don't like this, but it's used all is special needs.
oh, yes, yeah,
And we don't actually have everybody has special needs.
right. We're all special.
Our needs are unique to our circumstance, regardless if we have a diagnosed disability or not. So each person's needs is actually special to
Right,
them.
right, right. So it's with that touch on ableist, internalized ableism, and that being a fear. I think it's also a fear, though, for people that are non-disabled. There are often scripts about neediness um, that come up when I'm talking with people in sessions. I mean, if we're going to look at that through line of some of the stories we tell ourselves, there's this level of I'm too much and no one's going to tolerate that bullshit, you know? And so how do we like deconstruct that
Yeah.
and then look at like the worthiness and just being enough without having to perform? So that's, I think, just a human thing.
Yeah. I was talking about performance before we hopped on the call on a clubhouse I was in. I was like, yeah, there's a need to perform. And what we were talking about in that room was who makes the first call and what stops you from making the first call.
In like a
And
dating situation?
so it led to talking about it in that context. That wasn't the original context, but it was like that unique question was who makes the call first, the man or the woman, and all of that. I was like, well, society would tell you this is what's supposed to happen. That as a man, I feel like I'm supposed to take the lead and do that first. That's what story is running in my head. And I just
Mm-hmm.
said it during the call. And I was like, I also think that that's changing. And I brought up our conversation about the flirting thing, right? I was like, yeah, if you're gonna do that, you gotta like take a 2x4 and just be like
Yeah.
smack me in the face. And I think we are in society in a unique place where we're such in flux with what roles look like right now
Mm-hmm.
that they've kind of flip-flopped from from what they were, and it's got a lot of people confused, including myself. Okay.
Ah, this is like one of my favorite discussions. And as usual, we're going like down a little trail, but I think it's relevant. Um, because with we're looking at the pendulum swinging, right?
Mhm.
And whenever we kind of swing too wildly in opposite directions, we kind of get locked in this space of what's normal, which the I usually just say like that's just a setting on the washing machine because normal, I've never personally met anyone who is normal, so that's just like how it's been for me. But we get into these norms of what society says. Like you said, the man has to do the calling. Oh, well, now all of a sudden women are, fighting for their rights. They're looking for like equal, we want to be treated as equal. So then it's like, well, I'm going to call. Okay. So then we're over here, which then is emasculating for some of the men because they're like, wait, I was supposed to do that. She doesn't see me as a man. And these are messages
Yeah.
that confuse people. And so there isn't a right or a wrong way. And so often people are asking me like, well, what do I call? And I'm like, okay, we need to like really explore here because there's a way, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about with flirting. There's a way to bring everyone to this middle ground, and what each person is really needing is like safety, right? So
Yeah.
like feeling like this is going to be a safe call. Like
Yeah.
you want to know, like you said, that 2x4 needs to kind of whap you. Like you want to know, like, does this chick even want me to call her? Because, you know, we're
Yeah.
wanting to save face. We don't want to be like completely off on what we think we're picking up on.
Oh, 100%. And it's
Yeah,
like, okay, where are we in our relationship with each other? And this isn't even in a dating context. It's just in any type of relationship. It's like we have all these made up rules, and I'm like, I'm not even sure what rules apply here. And this rule seems stupid to me. Like
right.
the rule of, oh yeah, you gotta wait until X number of days. That's so fucking stupid. It's so like if you actually want to be with that person or be around that person, why would you wait?
Right. So
Like,
there's these rules. Like, I mean, that's a big one. Like, okay, I'm waiting through, but then it turns into like game playing, right?
yeah,
And I think if we're doing it, it all is dependent upon the motivation with which we are doing something. If it is, I'm going to sit here for 3 days so that he can start squirming, and I want him to miss me, and ba 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 ba, and there's all of those types of motivations, you can already feel that that is
you're gonna miss him. I'm gonna say that because most dudes are gonna be like, yeah, I'm over this. I,
well, you
see you later.
Nathan is
That would be
speaking for
me, okay?
himself. Nathan is speaking for himself. So now you know that if you want to talk to Nathan, you know not to play this game. But really though, again, like looking at the motivation now, same thing, but different motivation. I really need to take a moment. I don't want to like jump into anything. I'm going to feel into this. I'm going to like fill my life with things that I want to be focusing on so that I don't become so overly focused on this guy that it's all that I can think about. So I'm going to keep doing me. And if he calls, he calls. Totally different motivation. It's going to be a different outcome, you
Yeah.
know? The energy is different.
Yeah, and in reality, it also has to do with, and just gonna speak from opposite sex relationships. We we communicate extremely differently, just as sexes. Um, but yeah, so many rules, and you know what? It's interesting because going back to our original topic and talking specifically about disability related stuff, I think that we have all these rules, and yet for a lot of people with disabilities, I don't think anybody talks about the rules, like even the expected rule, because they all have the idea that they're not even supposed to do this. And so what happens is they start to be in communication with people, and so these people may know about the rules, these people may not know about the rules, and then they're like, wait a minute, what what happened here? I don't even know what happened, and I don't even know how to figure out what happened. And I wish I had my notebook in front of me because I wrote down something one time where I was like, sometimes people with disabilities, like people come up and they get labeled as, I think you said it, weird, or and I'm like, yeah, they may not be good at communicating with people because they haven't been given the opportunity
Mm.
to even practice communicating. So yeah, when you don't have practice, it's gonna be awkward because you're in the middle of figuring all this stuff out and you're like, I don't even know what's happening. I'm just trying to make it through this.
Well, yeah, and I think that's also an illusion too, that oh, people without disabilities get a ton of practice and they know what they're doing. Not true, my friend, But people with disabilities may feel like, oh, well, I didn't get that training. But in reality, like not a lot, I mean, a majority of people are probably not getting that conversation at home, I would say.
Oh yeah.
They may get that conversation with their peers, which that is true. People with physical disabilities are really not having that conversation often with
Yeah.
peers. There is a level of exclusion that happens um, from that conversation. But there is, I think that's also a thing where we can go into it feeling like we're already behind, you
Yeah.
know? But what is interesting is that's not just people with disabilities. It's anyone who feels different for some reason, and that keeps them from putting themselves into the game. Um,
Yeah.
and that's tough. So going back to the whole idea that, okay, now you're someone that doesn't have a disability, and
Mhm.
now you're interested in dating someone who maybe does. If you are looking at yourself and just how you are in this game of dating, and you're already looking at yourself as like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and now I'm interested in someone with a disability, it's because, and here's a myth that I hear, I can't get anyone else, so
Ooh,
I have to be quote unquote shopping over here. And that could be a really hard judgment of self, to where they may shut it down even before it's happened.
yeah. So let's talk about that for a second because I can just already hear in my my head all the haters with disabilities thinking, who how can that person think like that? Like the fact that I have to shop over here and like it's not about you. Like if that's the conversation that person's having, it's not an actual direct correlation to you. It's a correlation about how they are feeling about themselves and the societal narrative
Correct.
that they've been given about what it means to have a disability. Because
Right.
I'd posted something about a label that impacted you in your life, and somebody just posted they had heard me speak last weekend and they posted this story and I was like, it was such a powerful story, and they were talking about being at, I think it was a reunion or a retreat or something, and so they're a person who uses a wheelchair and they were getting food, and then somebody came up, wheeled them out of the way, and said, uh, I need you to be over here so that other people can get their food.
Hmm.
And so that
My eye is twitching.
you're out of the way. Yeah. And I say that because that's a reality
Mm-hmm.
of, so what happened to that person? They got treated as an other,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the worst.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had It wasn't other for me. It was you people.
Yeah.
It said you people. I will never forget that. But it's just so interesting that all this is happening, right? So that person had that feeling of being an other person, and then the person that you like, our imaginary person over here, is
Hmm.
also feeling that way. It may be communicated differently, but like this is this is what I am able to get, and it's a self. Both parties are dealing with self-worth
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah, for sure. And if the person that they're interested in that has the disability is also dealing with self-worth issues and they you can feel that, they're not giving off this like you would be lucky to have me type of an energy
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
So chances are they're not going to end up together even if they care about each other because the conversation's not going to happen.
Which in all honesty is probably a good thing, because
Probably better off.
if you ended up together, it wouldn't probably end well. And it's gonna make an assumption.
Unless both people were growing together,
Yes. Yeah.
then that would be something that would work. But it's tough. It's complicated.
Yeah. Well, welcome to life.
Yeah.
We all live through 2020 and right now. So if we haven't figured that out, I don't know what we're doing.
Yeah. And
But
Nathan didn't say welcome to life with a disability because that's not it. It's welcome to life. This and this whole thing is just about like a human experience. It's not saying, oh, someone with a someone who is non-disabled, not wanting to date people with disabilities, like how could they? Like people with disabilities might not want to date someone with disabilities. I used to be one of them.
hey,
Now I've almost like swung to the other end where I'm like, I think people with disabilities are kind of the best and probably better than, no, I'm just kidding.
hey,
but
be
but
careful. You
truly,
never know who's listening. I'm just saying.
I know, I know. Like my husband who does not
Yeah,
have a disability. Yeah. Jokes aside, um, I think that it's all about going inward and seeing what is coming up for me. Why is this a thing? Because if we started with that, which I think was lovely that that was what Danielle was saying. It was like, why was that a thing? And it no longer has to be a thing. So there's a level of like self-growth that is coming from that whole reflection there.
yeah, 100%. And you know, back to the not wanting to date people with disabilities. I remember one time my boss at the nonprofit I used to work at, we were sitting around, me, her, and another guy who's like a couple of years younger than me, and we were talking about dating. And she asked the question of, would you date somebody with a disability? And both of our answers were no. And
Hmm.
here's why. Like, it was from a very practical place for both of us.
Yeah.
We're like, we realize that yes, we do get older,
Hmm.
and our needs are probably going to be a little bit higher than everybody else. And so it's like, uh, how how will we, if we are two people with disability, how will we care for each other? How are we going to make that
Here's
work?
my argument on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Here's my argument on
Well,
that.
we know that you're going to disagree, but that's where we were at that moment for sure.
Yeah. I mean, and can I appreciate that that may have a lot more to do with how society treats people with disabilities? Yeah, because if we're thinking about like, okay, people with disabilities are typically not getting wonderful jobs. There's a lot of like discrimination when it comes to that. There's, and laws are in place to assist with
Yeah.
non-discrimination. But the reality is, it's Minesweeper trying to even navigate, do I mention my disability in a job interview? So that kind of speaks to where society is
Yeah.
at. And we're speaking as people who are here in America. So, um, and then just like disability benefits, like all of these different things, right?
Yeah.
But I still don't think that that should exclude an entire group of people, because guess what? No one is immune from the possibility of joining our club.
Oh
You
man,
know?
she's got the for those audio
Jazz
listening,
hands.
she's got the dance moves going on. Yeah,
It
a
was my
hundred
club
percent.
dance.
A
You
hundred
know?
percent.
So I don't know. I think, and to further argue my point, I think if anyone's going to be creative about how do we navigate this, it would be two people with disabilities. Um,
Yeah.
and it's my friends with disabilities who have made some pretty amazing creative suggestions to people when we did need to pivot into this 2020 life of like, hey, guess what? Here's what you could do to make this accessible.
Yeah.
You know?
Hmm.
And I think that's such a skill, a gift, a benefit, um, of potentially being in a relationship with someone who has a disability.
And here's a important point that I want to make sure that we don't miss this too. If you're sitting there and you heard what I said and you're like, yeah, that's me. I want to make sure that you appreciate where you're at, and
Yeah.
that is where you're at, and that's true. But hey, doesn't make you wrong for thinking that way. The whole point of having these conversations is so that maybe this conversation starts the path of having a different thought pattern, because I can tell you I'm not that kid anymore that had that conversation.
And
And
we both had that conversation with people. We've both been there.
yeah,
And again, like honoring the fact that of how society has a lot of barriers for people with disabilities. I can appreciate someone being like, nah, I got enough problems by myself. But
right, yeah,
being open to the idea of potentially not self-sabotaging a wonderful relationship. I think if we could just be on that page, everyone would be great.
and what you just said is important too, because I've said this plenty of times, but we can be very quick to become the angry disabled person.
Oh yeah.
Okay? And but what you just said was that person who said, no, I got enough problems myself. I'm dealing with my own stuff. And yet they may not say that out loud. And what often happens is we make a quick snap judgment to protect ourselves from rejection
Mm-hmm.
of any kind, whether it's them making that choice that they can't deal with it. And we, as humans, everything is about us.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a reality. And so sometimes getting rejected isn't about you, and it sure as hell isn't about the disability.
Mm. Yeah, I can tell you, I, for one, probably shut down 75% of the opportunities, dating opportunities that I would kind of pull myself out of because of perceived potential rejection, which may have been in my head and mostly probably not about the disability because I was hiding that at the time anyway. So it was like a lot of hiding when dating is literally like putting yourself out there. So it's hard to do both. hard to
Yeah,
do both.
you can't hide and be seen. That's the thing.
Right. It kind of ends up looking like the hokey pokey, where
Yeah.
you're in and then you're out, and then you're in and then you're out, and you're turning around. It's not.
And so who's gonna necessarily spend the time figuring out how to step with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you who. Maybe someone who has similar we'll call it trauma, who has like seen that and people have done that to them, and then
They
they're going to stick
recognize,
around because they
yeah,
recognize it.
yeah, 100%. The question is, how are you dancing together?
Right. Right.
Um, man, yeah, this is always interesting because we start one place and we end up all these other different
Yeah.
places that I think are super super valuable. Um, yeah, I wonder what it's gonna be like. I would love to have other people without disabilities be a part of this conversation, because that's realistically that's how we're speaking from two points of view,
Mhm.
and the more points of view we have, the more of the picture that we can see, and the more somebody can offer up an experience, and you'll be like, oh man, yeah, I never even thought about that, but I've definitely experienced that before. So
Mhm.
I appreciate you bringing that to the forefront. um, and I think ultimately, again, going back to stuff that we say all the time, it's about figuring out what you want.
Mhm.
And for me, like, having the courage to say that's what I want. And like, those are two core pillars for me in the work that I do in loneliness, is you have to have courage and you have to put yourself at risk for rejection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without either one of those things, connection really isn't going to happen.
Mm. Yeah, so how can we take those two things and like view them as a call to action, you know? So it could be sharing this and maybe inviting someone to this conversation. Another call to action I would invite people is, if you've got a disability that's more severe and that is something that you feel really is getting in the way of your dating life, I want to hear that voice and that story. I want to hear the voices of people who would not date someone with a disability, people who are currently in relationships with people who have disabilities,
Mhm.
all across the board, and having this conversation again and seeing what comes out of it, I think would be awesome.
Yeah, there's I don't remember the kid's name on TikTok, but he's going, at least during the summer, he was going across the United States on a bus, and him and his friends, and they were giving away all this money and creating experiences for kids with disabilities. And it's because his dad has cerebral palsy, and it's really interesting to watch that sometimes with the trends that come up on TikTok, because I've never heard his dad speak. I know that he probably can, but it's his speech is really impacted. And yet he got married, had kids, and so I saw a post where it was a video of his wife and him, and like just a small clip about like his wife and what attracted her to him. And so it's always interesting to watch those stories, right? Because it proves that if you're sitting there thinking it's not for me, well, there's somebody out there to show you that it's possible that there's a different outcome.
Yeah. That is one thing that I think social media is amazing for, and if we're not going to be represented in shows or movies as the love interest, what better than real life examples of
Yeah.
this being a possibility?
Yeah.
So,
All right.
love it.
I think that was everything. I think we're ending on a good note. Yeah, just make sure if you found this supportive for you, make sure and share it out because we do want as many people involved in the conversation. So, Michelle, if they've got questions for you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Fynan, and same on Facebook, Dr. Michelle Fynan. And my website's the same as well, Clubhouse the same as well. So hit me up anywhere. Let's keep this conversation going, and we'll see how it grows.
Yeah, and you can find me at the real Nathan Todd on Instagram or the Loneliness Coach over on Facebook. And if you watch this, listen to this, whatever way you do it, make sure to take a screenshot, put it in your stories, and that way people can see that you're taking part in this conversation. And with that, remember today is a great day to smile, and we will see you next time.
Bye.